Hey everyone, this is Donna Dracunis with Procreate and Tech Tips with Sequential Artist Workshop. I was going to do liquify stuff on Procreate today, but I totally forgot about it, so that takes a bunch of prep and I didn't prep. So we're not going to do that. We're going to look at selections and transform, the select and transform menu, and they kind of work together. You usually use them together. And so we're going to look at that today, and we'll come back to liquify. Hopefully I'll remember to prep for it next time, because there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with liquify, but I can't just, I have to have files ready to show you each thing. I can't just randomly do it. So let's switch to my iPad and we'll look at stuff. Feel free to, ask questions in the chat or interrupt me if I'm going too fast or something. So let's see. This is a random picture, so let's see what we're gonna do. This is a sketch of me after menopause. Before menopause, it was all filled with math and words and black and white. But anyway, I had this picture, so I thought this is a good one we can mess around with for selections. So selections and transform are interesting because when you click on them, you don't get a drop down. So you may have noticed we looked at actions a while ago. When you click on the wrench, you get a drop down menu. Same thing on adjustments. But when you click on selections, you don't get a menu. You get this tool palette on the bottom. And when you click on transform, you also get a tool palette on the bottom. So this is just a one layer file. So I'm going to add a couple more layers to it. And I'll put some stuff in a couple of them. So like in this one, I'll just put, these are, we can do things with my drawing there, and we can do things with other things in other layers. So for now, if I'm on my layer that has a drawing on it, I can click select, and you've got four choices: automatic, freehand, rectangle, and ellipse. I never use ellipse. I don't know why, but I use automatic, freehand, and rectangle a lot. So automatic means it will, when you touch something on the screen, it will automatically select whatever color you touch. So just look here, and this is the paper, and you can see when I first touched it, it left some white marks, and I just touched it again. It left some white marks, and it stops where there are lines. So it kind of works like color fill in a way, in that if I color dropped into my face like that, it does about the same amount. See, if there's a closed line, it doesn't go into it, but on this eyeglass there's a gap, so the yellow went into it. So I'll undo that, and we'll go back to the selection. So if I select by just one tap, it does the same thing, but you can see it's not the same, it didn't go all the way. So just like the color drop, selection has a threshold. So you can pull to the right and the left to get more or less of a selection. So automatic selection's not particularly perhaps great for this picture, unless I have to tap in a few spots to select more if I'm trying to select like all of my face, and not my eyeballs. But it works really well if you have something like this layer where you want to just select one color. And you can see the same thing there. When I first tapped it, it didn't get all the yellow. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. It left some dots unselected. So if I click and before I pick up, I keep pulling my pencil to the right, it gets more and more of them. And this is also a way you can select if you have, really defined shapes. Oops, sorry. Like if I have just a closed shape and I want to select the inside of it, I can use automatic. And I'm going to try that again. See, if I go all the way to the right, it selects the whole page. I have to adjust my threshold to what I want to select. So automatic selection is never perfect because Procreate's not that great at it. So for for this kind of thing, selecting a completely solid area, um, it's not that great. I use it more for inside of a drawing like that. And I generally use it for selecting something I want to change the color on or something. So you can see I can use it inside this drawing, and I can tap inside an area that's not solid at all and pull and go back and forth too. So the automatic selection, um, yeah, it has that threshold. Now I want to take it back what I said that it's not that great. It depends what brush you're using, also. So the brush I'm using is dry ink, and if I make it big or zoom in, you can see it has a lot of spots in it that aren't inked. So if I select the black, of course, it's not going to select all those white pixels. And that's not the fault of Procreate. That's the fault of my brush. I have these other brushes. Well, there's all different kinds. This one comes with Procreate syrup. If I use the syrup brush, you can see how solid it is. And then if I use the automatic selection inside that shape and pull the threshold up and down, it usually is going to get pretty good. But it still would possibly miss a couple of things. So let's fill that with a color and see what it did. Okay, that looks pretty good. It did leave a couple of gray pixels because that's called aliasing, and all apps do this. All painting apps do this, is where colors intersect, it tries to make a smooth line. So if you zoom way, way, way in, you'll see some pixels that are not pure black or pure pink. And I think I saw some that were a lighter pink or a darker pink. Yeah, there's one that's a darker pink. What Procreate or any program you're attempting to use will do is it tries to smooth out that edge. Now, what's the actual size of this drawing? That. So it looks, and if I went to see if I printed it, maybe it would be that big when I printed it. So when you zoom in that much, of course, you're never going to be able to do that on your final art. So I just want to warn you. Sometimes I do that to show you stuff, and sometimes I might do it on my own art, but that is a total waste of time to zoom in that much and work on your art. So auto select though does work better when you use smooth brushes and have sharp lines. It doesn't work so great for that. So why would you want to select something? Because if you have a drawing like this where I did it all on one layer and I don't want to change the whole thing, I want to just pick what part I want to change. So like if I just wanted to change the background, I could try to use auto select. Of course, I have to be on the correct layer, which I do all the time. And so you can do that. So all these things with automatic anything, automatic selection, automatic color fill, they work much better. They're made to work if you have all closed lines on your drawing, which I rarely do. But on this drawing, I have some really closed lines. So you can see that if I just want to select this character's face because there's no gaps in it, I can go like that and I've got her whole face and I can do whatever I want to it. So I know I probably talk about this all the time, but if you want to really work with these automatic things in Procreate, make sure you close your shapes when you draw the inking. So basically that's all there is to automatic. You just touch something and it does the layer you're on, unless you use a reference layer. So like here, now I'm on my color layer, so I can select more or less of the color. And see, it does the same thing where it's got the threshold. So don't forget about the threshold to add and remove. And of course you can keep, maybe not of course, you can keep touching more areas to select more. You don't have to just touch once. So if I want to, select all those color areas, I just touch each one. And again, I can use the threshold to make it bigger and smaller. So that's what automatic selection does. And then what I could do is I can copy and paste it. So some things come up down here. These will always be here. So you notice when I first start, it says add. So that means whatever I do is going to add to the selection. So here I touch the shirt and the head. Whoop, oh, sorry, I'm going to change the threshold of that. I just want the shirt. Whoop. So I can go in, and then you notice as I touch more, it's adding it to the selection. So that's add. If I want to use the selection tool to remove something, I can click remove. Now, say I didn't really want the flower, so I click remove, and it should remove the selection from the flower. So let me click a brush, and it didn't work. So I don't know why that didn't work. It should add and remove things from selections. It's not working for remove. So, okay, so I think that's a bug because I have done it before. But anyway, automatic selections. You touch something, it selects it, you can use the threshold. Freehand selection is really interesting. So with freehand selection, you can draw whatever you want. So say I want, I can turn these colors off and make a new coloring layer. And there's so many different ways to color things. But say I wanted to color part of this flower, I can obviously paint it just like that, with the brush. And there I went outside the lines. So that wasn't, kind of sloppy. But if I want to use the selection tool and freehand, I can actually draw around the part I want to use. And then I can paint inside that selection. Can use that brush or a different brush. So I can paint inside the selection. I can do anything just in that selection. So I'm going to turn my other colors back on and we'll work in that. What might we want to do inside a selection? Well, let's say, let me undo what I've done. Let's say we want to make half of each of these petals darker. That's a common thing I might do on a flower. So what I can do is I can take my selection and kind of freehand around half of each of the petals. When you notice this, when you start making a selection, when you first touch down, it adds a dot. And then you can drag your selection or just touch. So you don't have to drag necessarily like you're drawing. You can just touch the next spot also. And when you touch the original circle again, it closes the shape. And now I can do another one. So I touched it, it has a dot. I can touch again and it makes a line there, or I can draw. And when I touch the dot again, it makes another shape. So I could do that around each of these petals. And the reason I'm not drawing like straight up like that is because I can't draw a straight line. So if I start by just making the dot and then touching a second dot, it makes a straight line between that. And I'll show you again where it's more visible. Okay, but now I've made some selections around half of my flower petals. And remember, I'm on the color layer. So what I'm selecting is on the color layer. It won't change any other layers. And then I could go into any of my things. I can go into hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can change the saturation and brightness, and hue of all of that selected at the same time. And now I've got, two colors on each petal. So if you want to change the color of part of something, you can make a selection. If you want to delete part of something, there's two ways. Let's go into my inking layer, and I have two, so I'm going to merge them. So I have one inking layer now. So let's go into my inking layer and I see like there's some stuff in here. I made this sloppy. Well, there's two ways I can get rid of parts of it. One of them is I can take the eraser, and with our eraser tool, we can use any brush that we want. And I can just go in and I can erase whatever I don't want and get rid of it. So that's one way to do it. But obviously, if you are trying to be speedy and you have a lot to get rid of, that's not really a fast way to do it. So I'm going to undo that. And you can use the selection tool for deleting as well. So I'll go into freehand again. So I'm going to click and just go around the stuff I want to. I don't have to be real careful here because there's no black in there. So I'm just going to go around the parts I want to get rid of. And let's say I want to get rid of that whole thing, just what I did there. Go back there. Now that's selected. Now you'll notice there's no cut or delete down here. There's only copy and paste. If you lose your selection because you accidentally touch something else and it goes away, if you press and hold the S again, press and hold it, your selection will come back. Because sometimes you touch something and your selection disappears, as I just did by accident, and then by on purpose, I can bring it back. So I want to get rid of this, but there's no delete here. So you can get more options that you can do with your selection, like copy and paste and delete, by taking 3 fingers and swiping down on the screen. So then you get your full copy and paste menu. So it has cut, copy all, duplicate, cut and paste. What it doesn't have is copy and paste, and that's down here. So now I think I've actually selected copy and paste a couple times, and it made extra layers of that part. So I'm just going to delete those. I'm going to go back to that selection, and I lost my selection again. So I'm going to touch and hold it. It comes back. I'm going to swipe down with 3 fingers, and I'm going to say cut. So now I deleted all of that without having to sit there and scrub it with the eraser, because it took me a longer time because I did it 3 times to show you things, and then I accidentally duplicated it. And you may make mistakes like that yourself. But so you can delete things with selections too. And then, of course, there's rectangle and ellipse selection. So if I wanted to get rid of that whole flower, I would probably use a rectangle selection if I could tell. And you can, again, add pieces to it. That might be faster. If you know if it's inside a panel, of course, a rectangle selection would be really easy to do. And then there's an
Uh,
ellipse, which I never use, but
Donna, could I just
yeah.
quickly ask you, when you are adding selection pieces, do you just go ahead over the selected piece and add another?
Yeah, so we'll go selection. Let's look at rectangle because that's what I was just doing. And
Okay.
yeah, so say I do that rectangle. Now my backgrounds, my not selected stuff has turned into these lines, and my selected part looks normal. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I want to add to it, I can add to it with another rectangle, just do another one. See, now both of those are. And I can
Okay.
switch to freehand and add to it as well.
Okay. Wow.
So
Thank you.
you can mix. And again, I don't know why the remove isn't working. Now it just worked with the rectangle. So I couldn't get remove to work with automatic, but let's try it again with freehand. It's working with freehand and rectangle.
Mm.
So either they don't want it to work with automatic or it's a bug. But see, you can make your selection and add and remove to it however you want,
Mm-hmm.
except maybe
Thank
with
you.
automatic because it didn't let me remove with automatic. Okay,
Thank you.
so you're welcome. So okay, so what else can we do? Um, because there's other things on this menu here, right? So let's say I did a rectangular selection of this flower, and it's not quite fitting in a rectangle, but I decided, well, oh, I don't really want to select this. I want to select everything else and not that. That's what this invert is. Now that's not selected and the rest is. So you can, if you have a hard time or you need to select a lot, and sometimes it works really well to select what you don't want and then click invert. So that's what the invert button does. Copy and paste just makes a new layer with whatever's in the selection layer. So again, here we're on my inking layer. So if I have the selection made, and again, press and hold to bring it back. If I have the selection made and I hit copy and paste, it made a new copy of the ink from this layer because that's the layer I was on. If I go to the color layer, bring back the same selection and say copy and paste, then it made a copy of the colors of the flower. So it's working on whatever layer is blue in the list. So whatever layer you're touching on, when you make a selection, you're selecting stuff on that layer. I'm going to delete these extra layers. So that's something to be aware of because you can only make a selection like that on one layer at a time. Um, if I have multiple layers selected and I go to do that, okay, it will let me make a selection. Now let me hit cut and let's see what happens. So this was the layer I had selected first, and then I right swiped on these two extra layers. If I say cut, notice it only cut the lines. So that's the main layer I have selected. So you if you didn't know, you can select multiple layers in the list, but the selection tool still is only working on one layer at a time. Does that make sense? So like I selected that layer and then I also selected those layers, but the dark blue one is the layer that's actually selected. The other layers are sort of selected, so I can use it to group them or delete them. But if I draw or select or anything, it's going to be on this layer. So see, the pink came in on my inking layer even though I thought I was coloring, because that's the layer that's the dark blue. So that's really important to pay attention to if you're working with multiple layers and you have them selected. You really only have one selected for drawing or deleting and so forth. So it can be a little confusing. And it can also be confusing because in other apps, you might be able to, I'm just undoing a bunch of stuff here. In other apps, you might be able to actually select and delete from multiple layers at once. But in Procreate, it only works on one layer at a time. So here's another cool thing. Let's say I want to add a background to this page. So I had drawn a pink petal there. I'm gonna clear out this layer and use it for a sky. So to clear out a layer, when it's selected, you just go back and forth slowly 3 times with um 3 fingers. So you kind of scrub it clean. And I'm gonna drop blue in there. Now, why did that affect my other colors that are on top of it? Because my color layer is set to multiply, not to normal. If I move it to normal, you can see that the blue there doesn't really affect the colors, but my color layer is on top of my line layer, so it's blocking out the lines. So I would move my color layer under my line layer. So the order of your layers is important. That shows you that. Okay, so now I have this funny character with some flowers and there's a sky in the background. So say I want to draw some clouds and I'm going to use the freehand selection. So I'll put one cloud here and I'll just draw a cloud shape. And when I touch that dot again, it shows that. And now I'm going to put another cloud here.
Sorry, Donna, what layer are you on? The same layer as
I'm
the,
on the blue layer.
okay,
I
okay,
drew a blue layer, and what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to just delete some of it so that it turns white for
okay,
clouds. And so I selected 2 clouds with the freehand. But I don't, if I just go now and pull my 3 fingers down and say cut, okay, that's cool. It looks like clouds. It kind of matches the silly style of my drawing too, right? But let me show you something that would be even better, in my opinion, for clouds. If I take the freehand tool and I draw some clouds, and then before I do anything with the selection, I could fill it with the color, I could cut it, I could copy and paste it. Like I said, I could use hue saturation. Before I do that, let's go to this next thing, which says feather. And I'm going to drag that over. And if I zoom in there, and you see what's happening with the feather, it's making that blurry on the edge. So for clouds, I could subtract, I could make that blurry. So then I could do what I did, which is I could delete it. I can, like, but there's other ways to do it too. Like I could go into hue, saturation, and brightness and make the brightness go all the way up to turn it white. There's all different ways you can do that. But now I have fluffy clouds. So I used that with freehand and feather. You can use a feather with any of them though. So let's go to the color selection on the character's face. And I'll take an ellipse, which I never use, but that's okay. And I'm going to draw a little circle on her cheek, circle selection. I'm going to feather it. And then I'm going to go up here and pick pink and color drop pink in there. And now I've got kind of whoops. I didn't feather it as much as I wanted to though. So let's do it again. I want to make sure that I want her to get no, it didn't select anything. So what layer am I on? All right. Ellipse. Feather. All right. And then color fill. I'm going to pull it up kind of high to make sure it's filling the whole selection. It doesn't show up so good when you have a blurred color selection because it's not selecting every pixel. But look, it made her have a nice blurry pink cheek. So for making things that have a nice fluffy edge to them, the feather works good. And I just want to show you one thing though. Let's go back to the sky layer and let's just add some little gray parts on the clouds. So if I do some little selections here and I'm just gonna like add some shadows in the cloud there, and I'm gonna say feather. Now, as long as this feather box is up, I can't do anything else. So you notice when I go to do something else, the feather box disappears. So if you try to do something and it doesn't work, just click away so the feather box goes away. Sometimes it doesn't go away by itself. That's why I wanted to show you that. So if you have done feather and then you try to do something and it doesn't work, just click anywhere so that disappears. And now now I've just made some dark spots on my cloud and I can go hue, saturation, brightness, make them a little less bright so that they turn gray. And now I've got some shadows on my clouds. And that's not very artistically done, but you get the idea. So feathering a selection, and you can do that on any selection. So even if I had gone into my color layer and did an automatic selection on the green, I can still feather that, see, and it gets blurry. So you can use the feather on any kind of selection you made. So it's just nice to make, it's another way to make a cloud like that. And you can use selections for, like we changed colors here, we cut and pasted, we changed hue and saturation. So you can use selections a lot for things that you could otherwise do with a brush, because I could have gone all the way down here into my brushes that came with Procreate, which I moved to the bottom of my list. I could have picked a very soft airbrush with white and went on the cloud layer. And of course, another way to make the clouds is I could have just, whoops, now that brush is too big. I could have just drew them with the airbrush and you get kind of the same result. So it's just a different way to working. Some people do all their coloring with selections. They don't use brushes at all. And other people do all their coloring and things with brushes and really hardly ever use selections for that. So there's no, as in everything else I show you on Procreate, there's no one right way to do it. Okay, so what else? This is another thing that I don't remember as often as I should. But say I wanted to select her face again, and I want to have that selection so I can use it multiple times. And I want to use automatic because it's easy, right? So I went inside and the lines are all closed. I'm on the line layer and I select her face. I can go here where it has the heart. It says save and load. And I can click on that and I can save that selection. And there's a little picture of her face there with in white on a black background. Let me add another one just to show you what happens. I could select the center of the flower, go in there and say add selection, and there's the center of the flower. So if you save these selections, remember what I said is if you lose the selection or you turn it off by accident, you can press and hold it, but that only brings back the most recent selection. If I've done a bunch of stuff and I want to come back and get her face again, I can go into selections, go into save and load, and I can click on her face. I don't know if you can name them. Doesn't seem to let you name them. But as you notice, whichever one I click on gets selected. So saving those selections when you're doing comics coloring is really, really handy. Okay, so one more way selections can work for coloring is with color fill. So now I have my inking layer on and I made a new blank layer underneath it. And I turned off all my other layers in this drawing. I can use any of these selection options, automatic, freehand, rectangle, or ellipse with color fill on. And so that means when I make a selection, it will automatically fill it with the color. So now I have white selected, so that's not a very good example. So I'll go in and pick pink. And let's take selection, we'll start with freehand. Now, I'm on the blank layer underneath my inking layer, and I'm gonna do a freehand selection of the center of the flower. And so far, it looks like nothing's happening, but when I touch that circle again, it fills it. So now I can take another color, and I can change it because it's still selected. But if I want, I can leave it, start over, freehand selection with another color, and I can say, let me fill some of these petals with yellow. And each freehand selection I make will get filled with yellow. And here I missed, so I can come back and make another selection to get the part I wanted to add, and I can remove part like that. And then I can would have to go in there and cut if that bothered me. But I like to color outside the lines, so doesn't bother me. You can also erase. So a brush erase can be kind of replaced with selection. Smudge, like smudging the edge of something to make it blurred, can be also replaced with selection feathering. And so you should play with the selections and see what things you can do just for fun. So the color fill also works with the rectangle. So if I wanted to add like a new layer and make maybe I'm using purple for caption boxes, I can just draw, whoops, that I didn't have selections turned on, so it was going to paint. So I can go back to selections rectangle and I can make my rectangle, boom, it's color filled. And of course, the same thing works with the lips. And the same thing actually works with automatic, But in this case, it selected the whole layer because there's no lines or anything on this layer, and I'm just on this blank layer that only had the purple box. If I was going to use automatic to fill colors, I would set my inking layer to a reference layer, and then I would start a new layer under it. So let me just delete some extra layers that I made here that we don't need. And go back to this. Now I just have my inking layer. I have a color layer, but I turned it off because I'm going to make a new one. So my inking layer has reference checked. And I just did that by clicking on the little icon of the layer and checking reference. And what that means is if I use color fill and selections, especially automatic selections, it will refer to the reference layer, but I can be on another layer. So I can be on the color layer, but my reference layer is my inking lines. I can take an automatic selection with color fill on, and then I can go automatic selection with color fill on with a different color, and I can just go around like that and color things in with single taps. Don't forget to turn color fill off, though, when you're using it, because otherwise, when you go on and you're doing something else later, and you try to make a selection to, change her hair color, and I say freehand selection, whatever, it's going to color fill it because I forgot to turn that off. So that's something to, when you're done with it, make sure you turn it off. Any questions on that? So there's lots of ways you can use selections. Yeah. So if there's no questions on selections, we're going to take another look at into the other thing up here, which is transform. Now, let's just go back to having our two layers with our reference layer and our color. And I'm going to turn the reference off on this. So again, I just click on the icon, uncheck it, and the little text that says reference here goes away. Sorry, I keep touching it by accident. Goes away, and I have my two layers. Okay, so transforming things will work on multiple layers. So we use this to move things and size them and so forth. So before I said, like, if I did a selection and then I did a cut and paste, it only deleted from one layer. But I can use the selection with transform on multiple layers. So if I select both of these layers here, for example, and take the selection, make a freehand selection around this flower, now that's selected, I can go to the transform, which is the arrow. It usually defaults to uniform, and that just means that it keeps it at the same aspect ratio. So I can move it around. You can see how it's got the little dotted line around it. They call that marching ants. And I can click on these blue corners to scale it. I can click on this green thing on the top and I can rotate it. And that's all transform stuff that you do just however you want manually. So you can click on these dots and notice it will not get distorted or anything. It stays at the aspect ratio. It doesn't get stretched out of shape because it's on uniform. Okay. Freeform lets you stretch it higher or wider. So I can also see go sideways or up and down with freeform. And then distort, maybe not great for this example, but if you're trying to make something in perspective, you can use distort to change it. So distort lets you move one point at a time on these corners. And you can still do the sides. So you can move one point at a time on these blue dots with distort. And then warp puts this grid on it, and it lets you like really just warp the thing out of shape. And if you want even more control on it, you can click this advanced mesh, and it gives you more blue points that you can move around, because all these blue points are the things you can move. So warp is really cool for adding a little bit of dimension to things. Now that flower kind of looks like it's curved down, and if I went in there on the color layer and put a stem on it, it would look a little bit 3D, like the plant is a little 3D. Whoops. I went green for a stem. So the warping it kind of gave it makes it look dimensional. But anyway, once you select something on multiple layers, like I just did, you can use transform. So the selection like this, if I just said copy and paste or swipe down and said cut or duplicate or any of that, it would only work on the color layer because that's the one that's dark blue. But if I use transform in any of these, it works on all the layers that are selected. So that's nice because if I had this flower, now see, and now I moved it and then I brought back my selection, but it doesn't line up with the flower anymore because I moved the flower. Does that make sense? I moved the flower, but the selection stays where it was. So it's something to be aware of. Anyway, of course, if you're moving something in a comic that late in the game, you want to move the outline of it and the coloring. So it's nice that these things work together. You do not have to use transform on a selection though. I can use transform on the whole layer. So here I have both layers selected, and I can go into my transform uniform and I can just make the whole thing smaller and move it, maybe I want to center it and I don't want it to be that close to the edge of the page. You should limit your transformations when you're almost done with your comic, because the more you transform stuff, the more blurry the kind of edges of the lines get. Now, remember, I also use a rough brush for my inking, so mine are not smooth to begin with. But if you use a really smooth brush and you move and rotate things, it will get blurry. So if you want to do use transform for designing your page and moving things, and you're going to move them 20 times, do that like in your penciling stage. And it's okay to move things a little at the end, but you don't want to be moving them 20 times and then rotating them and all of that. Because then Procreate has to recalculate each pixel for how you moved it, and it's not perfect. It's not perfect on any app, not just Procreate. So what else can you do with transform? I'm going to turn these things off and make a new layer and just draw some simple shapes on it to show you some things you can do with transform. So we're just going to make some like little blobs here of different colors, maybe on different layers, because they're easy to work with for stuff like that. Okay, so and I have another layer. Now, you can't transform a layer with nothing in it. So right now I have this layer that's got nothing in it. If I hit transform, it comes up and it disappears really quick, but it says layer empty and then it goes away. So there's nothing to move around in a blank layer. That's why. If I go to this layer that only has this orange square and I click transform, you'll notice that it puts that box around the orange square. So I showed you all these things here that you can do manually: freeform, uniform, distort, warp. So different way you can change the shape of your thing, of your object. But you can also do things automatically. So it doesn't matter what you have selected up here for most of these. The things on the bottom are the same. So the first one you'll notice is snapping. And there's a couple things in there. I always leave regular snapping on, and I always have my distance at none and my velocity at max. I've never changed that. I always leave snapping on, and right now there's really nothing to snap to, except if I bring this right near the center of the page. Yeah, okay, there. Now it's lining up with the center of that circle. Sometimes it will show you these lines of things that are snapping to. So that's one thing. And sometimes it's more useful than other. With these two things as all the things on my page, it's not very useful. Magnetics is very useful though. So say I selected this and I want to move it, but I want to make sure I'm only moving it vertically or horizontally. See how it makes a line, and I can tell if I'm moving it vertically or horizontally, and it'll go to like 15-degree increments or something. But I usually use it if I just want to nudge something over to the left or straight up and down. And then once you move it off where it was, it gets a little crazy. So you can try these different snapping options for moving things around to see what you like. Normally, I leave magnetics off and snapping on. Okay, so that's pretty.
So, Don, I have a
Yeah.
question here. If
Good.
you had your drawing guide turned on,
Does it
would
snap to
it?
the drawing guide? Is
Yeah,
that
does it snap to the drawing guide? Yeah.
so we'll go into Canvas, drawing guide. Now I've got these things. Well, let's see.
Uh,
No. Well, yes.
Mm.
I don't know if you can see it.
I
When I
can,
get
yeah.
right on the drawing guide, a little orange line comes up. I don't know if you can see that on there. But when I drag this right on the drawing guide line turned orange.
Mm-hmm.
I zoomed in enough that you can see that.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
it kind of does. It's not as it
It's not
doesn't
like Photoshop.
no, it's not where like it goes like it really clicks to it. But
Mhm.
let's turn magnetics on and see if that does anything. No, it's just with those lines. It's not snapping to the guide. So good question.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's not snapping to the guide. Okay. So what else can you do with this? I use these things a lot. So say I had drawing panel borders. I do this a lot. And because I draw panel borders that are kind of messy, and then I want to duplicate it. So I'll take my rectangle selection and I'll select my thing there and I'll say copy and paste. And now I have two of these and I can move one over. Say I don't want my panel borders to look like I just duplicated it. So I can flip it horizontally or vertically. So you can flip your selection horizontally or vertically. And you can do that either with the whole layer or with just with just a selection. So like now these are two separate layers, but a lot of times I'll merge my panels and then I'll say, well, I only want to move one of them. So what if I take my selection tool, and let me use the freehand one this time. What if I take my selection tool and then I just want to flip that one around? So you can flip it vertically and horizontally with the selection tool and the transform tool. And you'll notice they're both highlighted when I have a selection and then I click transform. They both stay blue. I can also rotate things 45 degrees. Remember I said you can just rotate by grabbing this green dot and it'll show you here in text how many degrees you've rotated it. But if you want to do it a fixed amount, controllable, like you want to turn something 90 degrees, you can flip it 45 at a time. The other thing it has is fit to canvas, and that will make whatever's selected as big as it can be inside the canvas. So I wouldn't use it for that necessarily, but I would use it for this. So here I brought in a photo and I already did fit to canvas. So let me make it smaller. So say I brought in this photo and I want to fill the canvas with it. So I can say fit to canvas, and now it fills the whole screen. That would work better for a scan, that was even, but I use these transform a lot for fixing a photo. I do these photos and I don't care if they're perfect when I work with them in Procreate. So I would bring in a photo like that, and then I would use these distort and warp to make it fit how I wanted. So I would drag each corner to the corner of my canvas. Yeah, maybe I want the whole thing a little taller. I don't care if I'm distorting the aspect ratio of it, because this is just a rough painting that I made. So I use this a lot with transform to put something into the canvas, and then I use it like in the background, and then I add more layers and I paint and draw on top of it. That's something that I do a lot. And I don't usually scan them. I usually just take a picture of something. I did it with this one for a background, and I did the same thing. I brought in the photo and I just stretched the corners to make it fit on my canvas, and just an abstract watercolor. So I didn't even care if I just formed it. In fact, I might even want to do this more so it doesn't kind of show where the orange color ends, and I can just, make it bigger and leave it there. So I do stuff like that a lot. And notice that I did it with my fingers too, not just with the pencil. You can do a lot of these things with your finger. Some things Procreate doesn't let you do with your finger if you have it turned off. Like I can't paint with my finger, but it does let you do these transform things with your fingers. So you can twist and, you know, do all of that with your fingers as well as with the pencil. I'm gonna leave that like that. That looks kind of cool. Um, So yeah, any questions on any of that? It's just things you should kind of play around with, especially the selection tool. Select something in, like I think, probably say this a lot, but a lot of times I just mess around and I'll just open a file or make a copy of it and say, okay, what happens if I, try to select all of this? No, that's too much. Um, And okay, what happens if I take this and then copy and paste it, and then do something else to it, like go into gradient map and then change the layer blend mode. And then depending how crazy you are with your art and what you want to do in your comics, um, I play around a lot. So a lot of people don't. They have their, exact system where they do their pencil, their inking, and then their coloring, and they don't. But I really love playing around a lot. So anyway, I hope that you find those things kind of interesting. Where is the different colors coming from when you use automatic selection? Okay, Janice is asking here. So about this. So what happens is um there's if I use automatic selection and I have closed lines, I can select what's inside the closed lines, right? So I just selected that shape. Here's a piece of my eyeglasses. If I touch that, it's a closed shape, so it selects it. But here, it's just a blob of color, right? So if I do automatic selection, it's going to try to select colors, matching colors. And so this is the thing that I just play with. Um, and so it changes the colors to show that it's selecting it, and it just makes those up, but those aren't really there. When I say copy and paste, it goes back to the colors it was, but now I have two copies of it. And then the other colors came in when I went into gradient map, and we talked about those last time, so you can look up the previous video if you want to see gradient map. It lets you change colors that are pre-selected based on how light and dark parts are. And then the layer blend modes, you'll take two layers and mix them together in different ways. So I like to do this stuff. To me, that gives me some of the accidental stuff you get when you accidentally touch a watercolor to the wrong spot on your paper or something like that. So these kind of things give me a little bit of that, less predictability, I guess, than some of the other ways. So I like unpredictability, and that's the one way I can introduce it to digital art, by bringing some analog things in, and then by selecting things maybe that weren't meant to be selected, like just a blob of color instead of a closed shape. And I just go in and mess around. So I know you have to have time to do that because it's time consuming, but to me, just messing around on this is just as much fun as taking pencils and crayons and messing around on a piece of paper. So sometimes I using my iPad just for a sketchbook. And I think you can learn a lot just by messing around when you're not trying to, when you don't have a deadline and you're trying to get, something finished for turning it into an editor or something. So anyway, that's some stuff about the selections and the transform tool in Procreate, that just ways you can use those in your comics and other art.
Thank you so.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Will you be doing the color palettes at some point?
Yes, I will. I'm kind of going across all the things here. So we'll be
Yeah.
doing, the brushes, and we'll be doing brushes, and then we'll be doing more with layers, and we will do all the color stuff that's in there and all the different options. And and
I remember you said that now.
mhm. But
thank
and I'm hoping that I missed the liquefy on the adjustments menu because there's so much you can do with it. So I'm hoping to do that next time. And then we'll come back and go to the other side with the brushes and things. So, all right. Well, thanks for coming, you guys.
Thank
Remember,
you.
we're on the Saw YouTube channel so you can look at the old ones. And I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Okay.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.